Okay, all right. So we know fertility rate it kind of across the broad, all over the world, and even in here in America, a few years ago, the birth rate, fertility rate is over 2.2, 2.3, and now the most recent figure has gone down to 1.9 something, and apart from the African countries, really, and Middle East, the whole world, has fertility rate of less than 2. As we know, the replacement rate is 2.1, and so in effect, we are looking at a aging population, and without youth to replace. So even if we can live to 120, 150, as expected for today's teenagers, who is going to replace and work for them is going to be a problem. So, and so therefore, the demand for IVF is going to increase because people are getting married later and therefore having children later. And we talked about preservation of fertility yesterday, but without that, then we have to resort to IVF for a lot of patients, and so there's a vast increase in IVF cases done around the world in the last decade. This may be awareness, but it's also increase in production, especially in China, Japan, and so. But anyway, so we have to look at, as the world's IVF, when it started, it's mainly for white Caucasian, and now the IVF treatment is expanded to more, other ethnic and other races. Therefore, then we have to look at, is there really, a racial and ethnic difference in achieving ART pregnancies? We know there's definitely some racial difference in fertility because, from population study, we know that the puberty timing, the black is earlier than white, and in menopause, Asians, black, and Hispanic are earlier than whites. And also in ART results, white is better than Hispanic and is better than black and Asian. So Saver in 2008 started, the review of the cases, and he noted that the black American has 1/3 less live birth rate than white. They have lower implantation rates and high spontaneous abortion. Other confounding factors, of course, at that time, is less access to ART, probably because of cost, and the presence of uterine abnormalities. There are a few large population studies based on UK heifer and US SART and CDC data of different groups. One of the group is our chairman here, Norbert Gleiger. But none of them has contained scanty data on race, on Chinese. As a matter of fact, for instance, the Nottingham study included hundreds of thousands of ART cases and only 138 Chinese patients. So, it's less than 1,000. Or they just, all of them group under minority ethnic or under Asian. So there are other also more dedicated reports, but none of them, or very few of them, has separated Asians to specific race groups. Thus, collectively demonstrate that there's a difference in success rate, but not specific. Is there a significance in this? I think that we have to look at, especially now in this work, in this time that we're seeing more and more IVF being done for different races and ethnic groups. That we have to think of if there is only a genetic difference, or is there something else? Is there environmental and lifestyle does that play in success in IVF? We know that environmental, or at least in lifestyle, for instance, in PCO cases, lifestyle plays a great factor, in IVF success. And therefore, do they also, because of genetic or racial difference, do they have a different response to stimulation? Are the sperm different? And embryo qualities, endometrium, to name a few. So I think it behooves us to start really looking at big data racial differences. Fujimoto is, sort of like, he has one big study using CDC data, and he has a smaller data, Purcell, the same group in San Francisco, and they look at reports, and they, in 2007, started sort of, the debate, the ball going, that in San Francisco, where there's a large Asian populations, that they describe in UCSF Center, that the Asians does not do as well as whites in IVF, and but there's no subgrouping, so it's including Indians, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. And as we know, these may all have genetic and lifestyle differences. And then, there's when AMH come into as a measure, then become, is used as a standard for ovarian function, ovarian reserve. Sort of like, in actual fact, it's not the best, because prior to 2016, has gone through 2 antibodies, so very different measurements, and so are they really correlation? No one really knows. All the publications are before 2016, 2017, when Roche joined in and make a new antibody, and now I hope someone is going to do a bigger study using, the same antibody, so to do IMH. But anyway, AMH show racial differences, that in but different reports, and showing that in Hispanics, AMH is less than white. And if you compare AFC and AMH, both as ovarian aging indices, it seems to have a genetic component not yet clarified. There's some genes affecting AFC also positively affecting AMH. And then, in Gleicher's group looking at fragile X fMRI genes and look at the CGG repeats, show that there's differences between African blacks having the highest AMH, the lowest FSH when it starts but declines fast, and the Asians low AMH, ovarian reserve, but declines slowly. And yet, once again, the Asians are not differentiated into specific groups. Now, increasingly of importance in IVF and ART is vitamin D. And because vitamin D, we know, controls 10% of our genes, and in fertility, it affects oocyte development, fertility treatment, uterine function, endometrium receptivity, mainly, in the immune modulation. And of course, we know that it differs, from skin color and race. The darker skin tones needs more, has less vitamin D, but they, because they have protection from their skin color to UV. And the racial difference also show according to race and latitude, but there's no real study on Chinese versus Caucasian in vitamin D, although there's in general, vitamin D levels between white, non-Hispanics, black, and Asian. And vitamin D and AMH actually is positive correlated, and so there's a difference between white and black, but there's no relation to the BMI. And vitamin D upregulates genes which affects AMH production and growth cells. So vitamin D seems to play a relatively important role, in this aspect of IVF too. So I'm going to present, what, we have done, in the last few years when, we also want to look at, because we have, in Hong Kong, we have a patient population that is mainly Chinese, mainly Southern Chinese, and we also have Caucasians, and there's intermarries. So, we want to present, and we're looking at this, we found some interesting things. So I want to present our data and then throw it open to the floor to discuss, among all the experts to see, what we can do going forward and if anybody had any answer to our data. So, we look at patients in a single center. It's looking back, but the cases were done prospectively. There's no specific design to change whatever. It's the same stimulation protocol, and our stimulation protocol in Hong Kong, in my center, is to achieve enough oocytes. We don't particularly has a fixed rate, a fixed FSH dosage. What we think is we look at the AMH2, we look at AFC, we look at the day 3 FSH, and we decide, on what kind of FSH and what kind of FSH, what doses of FSH that we should use to let us get enough oocytes for that patient. So it's done by the same embryology laboratory, and it's all single blastocyst transfer under ultrasound. So we have 4 groups: Caucasian, Chinese, meaning Chinese husbands and Chinese wife, Caucasian husband and Chinese wife, and Chinese husband and Caucasian wives. So 4 different groups. And this is basically what we've said, and we are doing 90% frozen embryo transfer, and this is all frozen transfer data. There's no fresh transfer in this, and all single blastocyst transfer. So we can see, actually, it's interesting that if we divide it as a whole, Caucasians have better IVF results than Chinese, but it's not significant. But if we divide into age groups, so it's less than 38 and more than 38, and if we look at the pregnancy, the take-home baby rate, live birth rate, then there is a significant difference between white and Chinese over 38, and the miscarriage, etc., is not. And we have a sizable number. This is about 400 cases. So now, so this is another graph that we want to show between what happened. That is there a difference in treatment? Is there a difference that what we do to the patient that causes this difference? So we see if we, of course, I'm just going to compare the Chinese and Caucasian first, because the numbers are there. Afterwards, I'll show you the other 2 groups because the numbers are smaller. So, so we look at the number of cycles across and the average number of oocytes that are collected. Of course, 38 over 30 is less, but if we look at the age groups, there's no difference. The average number of M2 follicles, M2 oocytes, no difference. Available usable embryos, again, no difference. And the percentage of M2 and the fertilization rate, everything, is no difference. And if we look at more of this age, no difference between the 2 in the same age group. And the only thing that is so different is the vitamin D difference. The Caucasians, on the whole, has a borderline vitamin D insufficiency, and the Chinese has a vitamin D deficiency. And the same hold out, for the 38 group. And as we see, the average day 3 FSH, there's no difference, and the LH and at AFC, there's no difference. And further on, the same as you come down, you can see then the total use of FSH in units, no difference. Peak E2 levels, no difference. And the average progesterone on the day of trigger, no difference. Endometrial thickness, no difference. And yet, the live birth rate, under 38, no difference. Over 38, a significant difference. Now, if we look at, I didn't put up detailed chart for you to see because the numbers are much smaller. So, we have, of course, like more Caucasian Chinese couples, and the live birth rate actually, looking at this figure compared to the previous, the Caucasians is significantly different, and the Chinese Caucasian, there's no difference. So there seems, that even in marriage, mixed marriages, the Chinese seem to do worse, than Caucasian, either married to Chinese, or married to, And this is, I took this chart from Shapiro, and I want just to see, if you look at the different groups, this is not specifically Chinese, it's Asian, Pacific Islander. But if you look at the different groups, that when it comes to gestational carry, there's no difference, and but there's some difference in autonomous ART difference, and again, the oocyte donation is a little bit less, but not much less, because oocyte donation is still the same ethnic group, and okay. There's only one report from my friend Andrew Kahn, in Australia. He looked at his single practice in 10 years. Single practice in 10 years, 2,500 cases, sizable study. And he found that the clinical pregnancy rate of Caucasian is better than Asia. But again, there's no specific groups dividing Asian in his study to race and ethnicity. And after controlling for age and years fertility, number of oocytes, number of embryos, then the difference becomes not significant. So his conclusion is that in Australia at least, Asians received delayed treatment, and therefore it accounted. So Asians are older, and so it's they accounted for the difference. Chromosome studies, recently, the New Jersey group reported, 4 groups: Asian, Caucasian, East Asia, which meaning India, Central Southeast Asia, and there's no incidence in haploidy occurrence. So we know that it's not really the embryos that is causing the difference. So now, does environment, cause a difference? Does environment make a difference? There's one big difference between the Caucasian and Chinese in Hong Kong. It may be environment and as well as food intake. Southern Chinese are brought up mainly on a seafood diet. And plus, there's a really, as anyone who's visited Hong Kong, everyone is crazy about shrimps and crabs and all this, all this so-called bottom scavengers that actually has the worst, has the worst heavy metals, mercury, cadmium, lead, to name a few. We have done a study and published in an environmental journal about 20 years ago, and it showed that the the fish in Hong Kong, the larger the fish, as we expect, has more cadmium and lead and mercury, and also, and the flatfish, which is on the floor, has much higher heavy metal. So, people who eat a lot of seafood will have more heavy metal. And I think not that I want to say environment or food, but is it a factor? And we did then, at that time, in 1998, we look at mercury concentration in human hair. And here we look at, the mercury in Hong Kong residents, Chinese actually, consume 4 or more meals of fish per week as compared to people who have less than 4 meals of them. And then we compare to the people reported by Salonen in Finland and also WHO reporting. So we compared the group and we found that the people who has the most fish, most seafood or most fish diet per week in men has the highest highest mercury level. And this is part of the gain. So if we divide the mercury levels into low, medium, and high, so we see that then the fertile, subfertile, become higher, the subfertile male it also increases, in number. And we also look at, together with that group, 16 Hong Kong vegetarians, Buddhist monks, the hair, and they donated, a group of them donated hair for us to study at that time. And you see the mean mercury is way off. So, diet does, cause a difference in the heavy metal. Okay, so I don't want to say there's a conclusion. I want to say a summary. We reported our data on a single center, not a single doctor, prospective IVF treatment. The patient is separated into race groups for analysis. We noted that there was a difference between Caucasian, Chinese, especially the age, although there's no differences in most parameters. And the only difference was aging Chinese seems to do a lot worse than Caucasians. Mixed marriages show similar trend, but numbers are too small. And we would like to have maybe a collaborative study with centers that got a large mixed couples population. And right now we're starting one, with Sydney and Melbourne, because there's a lot of mixed marriages, down there, maybe much less anywhere else. The Chinese had low vitamin D levels, and on the whole has higher heavy metal damage. Thus, apart from genetic reason as proposed before, there may be environment and lifestyle reasons. And to find out the exact reason, we need more and larger single racial group analysis, and maybe to encourage multi-center studies. And I think if we have more and more mixed marriages, maybe that will come down to clearly to find out whether it is genes, whether there's other factors. And my conclusion would be the racial IVF success difference remains an enigma. And acknowledgement to my team, my collaborators, my lab staff. Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you for your interesting presentation. Maybe somebody has the questions?
That's so interesting. Some years ago when I was at Brown, I was looking at the local newspaper and I said, there's an article about the pollution in the Providence River that runs through the middle of Providence, one of the highest concentrations of heavy metals. The Industrial Revolution in America began their first mill. And I looked, and they were talking about people eating fish out of that. And I said, oh my gosh, it's my patient. She had been catching fish and grilling it. So that launched a study. We ended up publishing it. We looked at heavy metals in serum and heavy metals in follicular fluid. And the heavy metals are actually concentrated in the follicular fluid. So it'd be interesting to look at that. I think there are many ion transporters that are co-opted, so that it ends up pushing the heavy metals, so the egg is being bathed in it. It'd be really interesting to pursue that in your population where they have such a high consumption.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't put your study on my slides, but I read
Very
the study
work.
with the heavy metal in follicular fluid. Yeah, thank you.
That's really was a food for thought. Not fish, though. But there was a study by Roger Short in the males in Hong Kong many decades ago, in which he looked at the pathology reports from men that had died that were Caucasian and not Caucasian living in Hong Kong. And the Caucasians had bigger testicles because they weigh everything without even thinking about it in the path labs. And so he went back over those, and the Caucasians had much bigger testicles than the Asians. And he concluded that was because of the mating pattern, that with greater sperm competition in the Caucasian population, you wound up having bigger testicles because, well, that's the simple sperm competition. The greater it is, the bigger the testicle in the subsequent generation. And now you mentioned, I thought about ovarian reserve, that the ovarian reserve was higher, I thought, in Caucasian women?
Yes.
So that would explain why at an older age you have poorer results, I guess, with Caucasians than with, Asians and Caucasians. Would that be true?
Well, it may be, but Norbert's study showed that Asian women, although started with a lower AMH, last longer. So, so if it lasts longer, then it should be maybe reversed, that the younger women would have more difference, and the older women would have maybe even out, So I'm not sure. This is why I thought when Seth asked me, do you have anything to say in this meeting? Yeah. And I said, well, I got this stuff like, a puzzle to me, and I want to present it so that, people here, who are all experts, maybe, we can think of something.
Well, in the male, it's very well studied. And I don't know about the female, but that would be worth studying if there's differences in the female related to the mating pattern.
Yeah. Thank you.
Quick, please.
Thank you so much for this provocative talk. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is going to become increasingly important as our population ages, and we need so many more younger people to take care of the elderly. You probably know that African Americans in the US have a 60% greater chance of premature babies. And nobody understands that. It's even a greater risk than Africans in Africa. And it's weird to talk about Africans in Africa because Africa is so huge. It's not a homogeneous population. And so I wonder if you may, first off, you should initiate an international multi-center program. And I wonder if you want to dissect it further into Han versus just Chinese. And also, the work on the mixed couples speaks to perhaps mitochondrial inheritance or maybe central inheritance. And so I think tracing that is immensely important. And finally, it would be fascinating to compare the seafood consumption in the Mediterranean diets. Pasquale. No, but I mean, there's a lot of, I think, of the Portuguese that, again, seafood is consumed in a lot of different places. But this is very important for an international effort. Congratulations.
Thank you.